Good afternoon. Welcome to the show. I'm Jim Fleizik. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with data center consolidation and optimization strategies in the federal government. With me today on the show are Joe Klimovitz, the Chief Information Officer at Department of Justice, Melanie Parker Hill, the Division Chief Enterprise Operations Center at the U.S. Department of State, Chris Steele, the Chief Solutions Architect at Software AG Government Solutions, Chris Howard, the Vice President of Federal at Nutanix, and Tony Vicinelli, the Federal Technology Director at Enlight Software. Let's get into talking data center stuff. We're going to start with Joe Klimovitz. Joe, I know you've led up, been a leader in this area for the federal government, right across government-wide programs and so forth. Can you give us some examples of areas where you see progress really being made in consolidation and optimization of data centers?
Sure. Well, first off, Jim, thanks for having me on the show, and glad to be here. Within the Department of Justice, our data center consolidation effort really began in about 2010. We had at that time around 110 data centers, and to date, we've consolidated about 75 of those data centers, somewhere in that number.
Great.
We've estimated that in the last 2 years, we've saved or avoided spending $28 million. So really have achieved benefits. Right now, we're on track to consolidate the remaining data centers into 3 core enterprise facilities by the end of 2019. This is going to produce another estimated but $27 million of cost avoidance. So it does pay off when you consolidate and you can get out of some of your more expensive data centers and just have that greater density. Now, the other thing is moving to the cloud is a very key aspect of this. So we've established enterprise-wide cloud vehicles that we can move very quickly to commercial cloud. So it's a hybrid model of government facilities and in conjunction with commercial facilities.
Yeah, excellent, because we're going to talk about that here too in a little bit.
So just as another example, we closed our second largest data center down in Dallas, Texas in 2015. And we're on track to close our largest data center up in Rockville, and that's about 100,000 square feet of data center space.
Yeah, I've been in that one a few times.
Yeah, that'll close next year, and we're well on our way to doing that. I think one of the things that as you consolidate, though, you've really got to pay attention to the network, to the security, and so we're also building out a cloud-optimized security stack for all DOJ unclassified traffic with built-in redundancy, so that we can get to our cloud solutions any place, anywhere, anytime, without creating any bottlenecks, but still adhering to all of the security practices. One thing that's been really instrumental in us achieving this progress is early on we established a data center committee with 4 different focus areas, one being finance and procurement. So you bring all the money guys and the acquisition professionals together to work through all the things that need to be done in that area. Second being migration and optimization, because you really want to, there's a lot of
move old stuff into a new facility.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of work that goes on in that. So as you do move, you want to make sure that it is optimized. Also, the enterprise facilities, the facility guys, where's it going to go, what's the best place, concerned about all the technologies. And then also communications is another aspect, because there's a lot of communications that has to go on with an effort this big. And this group meets bi-weekly.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and we're going to drill down a little bit more on cloud and managed services and how you make those decisions in a follow-up question here in a couple minutes. But Melanie Parker Hill, tell us about some progress over at State Department. I know we've had you on before, and we're always excited to hear the progress you're making.
Thank you for the invitation to return. We're making great progress over at the Department of State. I believe last year when I was here, I spoke about the modular data centers that we were standing up at one of our locations on government-owned property. We received a mandate to come out of leased property, and I just heard Joe talk about cost savings, and I smiled because, of course, those are drivers. You know, what are we doing in the federal government? How are we best utilizing our money? Things of that nature. So last year we did stand up our first modular data center on property in Maryland. Today we're actively building 2 additional modular data centers. Doing so allows us to come out of leased property. We're that leased property is currently 11,000, about 11,000 square, and we're going into 1,000 square. We're looking at it's dense, it's scalable. You have the modular component of it, using ambient air and things of that nature. So it works into what we're looking at for the optimization of data centers, because we have the mandate to look at PUE, to look at the power utilization.
Sure.
We have the virtual footprint versus the physical footprint, things of that nature. And I'm still touting for the department. We have that virtualization first policy where every device that or application that's considered for the department, we must look at it to see the viability. Could it stand on a virtual machine? We're not quite as advanced on cloud, but we're right on their coattails over at DOJ. We do have a cloud governance board where anyone that's looking to go into the cloud, again, the application is evaluated. You just can't go out. So one of the things that I believe, just from other network opportunities that I hear, is that a lot of times, sometimes technology may get out in front of the technology owners, and then you have to go back and try to herd the cats back together and get everyone back in a group again. So we're doing great things, and just
excellent. Good for you. Chris Steele, how about Software AG Solutions? How do you fit into the data center consolidation picture, and how are you working with your customers to move programs forward?
Great question, Jim. It seems like a couple years ago when we were talking about this, a lot of our customers were still in that planning phase. And now we see that a good majority of them have actually moved into the they're in the actual progress of getting it done.
I know early on, data center consolidation, everyone was saying, well, we'll see, it'll be around, but it might fade or whatever. But it has maintained momentum for years now.
Yeah, absolutely. Where we play in is we have a portfolio management product that allows you to go in. We can ingest all of your different assets from your data centers, be able to visualize all the interdependencies. So if you think about, whereas we used to have a lot of just traditional monolithic applications, today most of those are connected in some way. So what we have is we have a bunch of systems within our network, interconnected systems. And when you try to consolidate, when you're picking stuff up and doing, a lift and shift, what happens is you have to be able to understand what all those dependencies are so that you don't end up moving some pieces and not the others, and start breaking those dependencies. So we use that product to be able to track and manage that, and also to really track
the change management process. As you move things, you better have a disciplined process to make sure that one piece doesn't impact negatively somewhere else.
Yeah, and back to what Joe was saying, probably the biggest ability is to track the ROI, to be able to say this is our cost savings, this is the cost avoidance that you're getting out of this data center, because a lot of it still, even though we're moving forward, we have to continue to do the justification, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that in the costing, I think, is important too, because I know a lot of programs out there, best practices and share and savings, things like that. But if you can't baseline your current cost and measure cost down the road, it's you're unable to really articulate what those true savings are. Chris Howard, Nutanix. Tell us a little bit about Nutanix and how you play in this, and the kind of things you're doing to help your customer base move forward.
Sure. Yeah, Nutanix is a infrastructure company, so we have a purpose-built appliance that runs virtualization software. So it eliminates the need to continue to buy silos of servers, so compute, storage, network, and virtualization, and try to cobble them all together and make a single platform. So we give it to you in a purpose-built manner that's secure and easily scalable, easy to implement, easy to manage, those types of things. But we've been involved in a lot of different data center consolidation initiatives, and I think the most important thing that I've taken away from the government is that's your opportunity to modernize. If you're just going to forklift or take legacy technologies and move them from one place or another, or continue to invest in legacy technologies, then you're really not going to save any money. There's going to be really no benefit. Maybe you'll save a little bit on floor space, but you're not streamlining your activities around the management of the infrastructure or just the scalability of the infrastructure. You're not making your environment cloud ready. So if you don't modernize first before you start do this initiative, it's going to be difficult. And we see that all the time. And there's many examples where people that do modernize or bring innovation into the data center are very successful. successful, and there's others where they just do that forklift approach and it's not so successful.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I see nods all around the table here too. I think this whole panel is sort of like in violent agreement that you have to modernize first. Plus, you're going to get smaller footprints too. I mean, face it, technology today is a lot smaller than in the past. As you modernize, you're going to be able to get smaller footprints and better utilize space and so forth. Anthony Vicinelli over at Enlight Software. Tell us a little bit about Enlight and how you play in this and the kind of things you're doing to help your customer base move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you very much for having us. Enlight Software is a data center infrastructure management software suite, right? So we're sitting right at the intersection of IT and facilities, right?
Okay.
So we provide a place where both of those groups of people can talk across, a common language, and the Data Center Optimization Initiative has helped with that tremendously, right? It's given us a place where you can look at what where your IT assets are, how they're consuming resources, what am I using, what do I have left to be able to optimize, and just like Chris mentioned, it gives, I think the optimization initiative has given people a chance to then innovate, right? So how do I know what I should be moving to managed services? Which things should I be virtualizing? Is my virtualization ratio where I need it to be? And is it trending in a direction that is positive, right? That is going towards the targets that we need to meet. And so, being able to provide a place that people can talk to one another in that same language has been really beneficial, and just like everyone has sort of echoed, that folks are now actually doing that or have a process to get there, right? And then also being able to, Melanie brought up the modularization of data centers, right? So it's not just lifting and shifting into the cloud, but how can I have elasticity in my data center when I need it for the things that I need on premises?
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of success there.
Yeah, this is exciting stuff, man. It's no longer just a square building with air conditionings and raised flooring. Huh? It's got all kinds of neat stuff going on now. Let's talk about, Joe brought it up, Melanie mentioned it, and so let's drill down a little bit and talk a little bit about how virtualization, cloud computing, managed services, how do they fit into the optimization, and how do you go about, making decisions about what's cloud, what's premise, what's. Let's start with Melanie this time. Melanie, talk to us a little bit about virtualization and how cloud computing and managed services and how they fit into your overall data center plans.
Sure. As I said earlier, the department, we do have a virtualization first policy. Every device, and believe me, we come from the day, and we've been doing virtualization for years. We started out with GSX up to EXX now, and whatever version we're on. But I remember the day where I was, the tech that we wanted to hug and kiss and feed our servers. We had to touch it every time. But in trying
Did you talk
to
to it like it was a human being?
sometimes you did, like, come on, don't fail me now.
That's how I used to separate like the software engineers from the operators. The ones that like talked to the machines like they were human beings, they were the software engineer guys.
Yeah, and sometimes I guess it made us feel better, of course. But when you move from that framework, what we're looking at again, one of the things that the department, the idea was to move away from brick and mortar, not to have all this. You talked about force place and air conditioning, things of that nature. In the legacy buildings, those places were normally integrated with people. So you had a data center on one side of the wall and people on the other side using the same environmentals. And we know that normally the environmentals to keep the power and electricity going for an air for a data center costs much more than people space. So when we're looking at reducing the footprint, when we're looking at when we reduce the footprint by looking at virtualization, one of the things that Joe talked about was the documentation, or as far as we talked about the governance board, having that board there. You have to have a team of knowledgeable professionals there also that will be able to evaluate those devices on a consistent criteria as well. So you're not doing one thing for one side and not doing the same shared thing for the other side. So when you take all of those services and put them together, you come up with a governance board, or you come up with your policies and procedures for the department. Again, that's how we came up with virtualization first. The the Cloud Computing Governance Board also has similar criteria that they actually come together, and it's just not just, and actually my deputy CEO, you have levels that high that sit on the board, and they are concerned and they want to know how we're managing the environment at the department and how we're servicing those customers that are beyond our direct immediate bureau.
Sure. So once you get things down, then you've got those repeatable processes in place, so you're not doing something, making it up every time. You've got it flows smoothly. Joe, same question. Virtualization, managed services, cloud, data center consolidation. Sometimes I'm thinking we're going to wind up sort of like having one show that just deals with data center consolidation, cloud, all those subjects, because they're becoming intertwined. But how do you decide what goes to a public cloud, private cloud, data center?
Sure. Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. But our optimization strategy is driven to accomplish a couple of things. One is cost efficiencies, and that's paramount.
Sure.
Data interoperability and improve the customer experience. Virtualization, cloud, managed services, those are all foundational to that strategy. The vast majority of our systems today are virtualized. So what we're doing now is working with industry partners to pilot more advanced capabilities, focusing on data and compute, intensive applications, and a lot around the litigation support activities in Department of Justice. Our ability to partner with commercial cloud service providers, and develop secure, reliable environments for our information and for our compute is key. I recently was out in Silicon Valley and met with a lot of corporate leaders out there, and I was really encouraged by some of the emerging capabilities that I saw to effectively manage across these different cloud solutions. So today, we know how to consume and how to get to one cloud, but I'm actually trying to figure out how to work across many different cloud solutions, almost like you're trading on the stock market exchange. You're able to move and reprovision services that quickly.
Right.
So we're
move into the more profitable areas as you move away from the things that are not working
prices
as well.
change, requirements change, capabilities change, needs. Be able to change basically driven by policy or other things, not having to take years to migrate and to move. And so these are enterprise-wide capabilities that we're looking. So we're piloting several cloud computing solutions that really start stressing the analytical challenges that we need to address, and include micro-virtualization, which is application level isolation from the OS, to provide enhanced cybersecurity. Again, I'm looking to move beyond software as a service.
Sure.
That's easy. That's yesterday.
Right.
How do we move into our intractable mission enabling applications that are more?
Actually, I think it sounds pretty cool. I mean, you got a variety of cloud things, and you're moving things around to optimize your activities based on whichever potential cloud activity it lends itself the best.
Absolutely.
That's very, very interesting. I want to hear from our private industry guest panelist on the same subject, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Fleisig here with Joe Klimovitz from Department of Justice, Melanie Parker Hill from the U.S. State Department, Chris Steele from Software AG Government Solutions, Chris Howard from Nutanix, and Tony Vicinelli from Enlight. We're talking data center consolidation optimization. When we went to break, we heard from our government guest. Let's hear from our industry guest on the same question. We're talking, how does virtualization, cloud computing, managed services, how do they factor into the way you approach data center consolidation? Let's start with Chris Howard over at Nutanix. Chris, how do you go about figuring out how you're going to work with your customers around those issues?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, obviously all of them have a place. None of them are utopia, and it's not one size fits all.
And not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Exactly. But virtualization has been around for, I mean, what, going on about 17 years, 18
Right.
years. So pretty much everyone, in my opinion, should have that virtualization first requirement, like Melanie said. Pretty much all the applications can be virtualized. So that one's pretty much a standard day-to-day process, right? If you're not virtualizing, you're behind the curve. Figure out what you can virtualize, get it done. It'll save you money. There's really no argument there. Cloud computing, and cloud means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You have to be careful when you evaluate what goes into the cloud, what doesn't. There's a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of not so good benefits. If it's a predictable workload and you have a streamlined infrastructure and you're using innovative and modern technology, as long as the application's predictable, in our opinion, you should keep that on-prem. If it's an unpredictable workload, say for instance a big data workload where you need to spike up for 30 days, or a end of month financial run where it just doesn't make sense to procure additional equipment and grow that out when it's only being used at the end of the month. So unpredictable workloads are very, very good for the cloud, because the cloud brings a lot of benefits, but sometimes it can be the Hotel California type of approach, right? You can check in, but you can never check out.
Right.
So you have to be real careful about that. And managed services, we participate in a lot of that. We do a lot of capacity on demand and the ability for customers to scale up, scale down. So as long as you use those types of contracts effectively, I think they can be extremely important to your organization. It also allows you, depending on what part of the government you're in, to use different colors of money and stuff like that. So there's benefits to that as well.
That's a good game to learn.
Yes,
too,
it
by
is.
the way. Tony Vicinelli, how do you the issues around cloud and managed services, virtualization, how does that all figure into the strategies that you guys come up with to support the customers?
Yeah, sure. So at Enlight, we look at each of those utilities of which, how can we help the customer decide which of those utilities they should use to be able to provide the service that they're trying to provide, right? So which solution is best at the right time, and being able to understand, if something like a managed service, should we be in the game of owning our own equipment for a particular part of our business, right? Maybe managed services are best for us. Maybe, as the data center optimization initiative points out, is maybe we can become a managed service, right? Provide managed services to other federal agencies, right? So being able to have a handle on your IT assets, where they are, which are virtualized, which are potentially moving to the cloud, which we can provide managed services for other customers. We like to give people that total view, right, and be able to make decisions from that data.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, things have a way of going around and coming around. I mean, remember the 1980s, we were all talking time sharing. We don't have to have stuff here. We can just use someone else's equipment. That kind of thing. And for some reason, a lot of this takes me back to those days where people were talking about that. Chris Steele, Software AG, tell us a little bit about how you factor in, cloud, managed services, virtualization, things like that into your strategies and supporting your customers.
Yeah, I think we've really touched upon a lot of the core components, really. In addition to the consolidation, how do we modernize? How do we prepare for the evolution of technology? So Joe mentioned the growing trend in microservices, and what does that mean within a data center? Interconnecting all these different services that are sort of self-contained leads to additional network traffic that we haven't seen in the past. In addition, to go back to sort of the Hotel California, there's still a lot of agencies today that are running on the mainframe, and they can't get off. And how do we deal with that when we're looking at these data center consolidations? Because a lot of times what people fail to factor in is the cost of actually trying to pick up a mainframe and move it.
Right.
It's
I tell people to just call it a big server. And that way you can say you're off. You can say you're off the mainframe now. You just moved to big servers.
right. So yeah, I think in general there's a lot of planning that needs to go in, and one of the other things that often tends to get left out is documentation. So we've developed years and years of documentation for the current architectures, how do we go about replicating that, especially when we're evolving and moving these things around, and what does it mean in terms of the documentation to go from just monolithic, bare bones metal to these virtualized servers?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So I remember no one ever liked to do documentation. It was sort of like an administrative thing you got to do. But I bet a lot of folks moving now wish they had good documentation. So it really comes back to help in terms of what's going on. Let's switch and talk a little bit about some of the things you're learning along the way here. We like to talk about lessons learned so that folks listening to the show, for example, who are doing the same kinds of things you are or trying to, might learn from you about some things you learned along the way that might help them. So let's start with Joe here again. Joe, what are some of the lessons you're learning to date with data center consolidation optimization that you think you'd like to pass on to our listening audience?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is getting buy-in from the folks who are managing the current data centers, their leadership, and get your leadership buy-in as well, because leadership support is probably the most important thing. This is not necessarily hard, but it does require perseverance and persistence, and you need to keep at it for a while. A lot of this doesn't occur in 1 year, so you need to think about a multi-year strategy.
People get used to doing things the way they've been doing them all along.
Absolutely. So I think the other thing is a fairly detailed migration plan and schedule. Develop that early on in the process, so you can't plan too early when it comes to this kind of optimization effort. And hold people accountable for the schedule. I think cost estimates, making sure that the cost estimates are realistic, and they fully account for all associated costs, and that can be a key factor in terms of whether you move to a cloud, whether you do it on-prem, and so on. So you need to make sure that you're factoring all that in. The network costs are substantial. Several of us mentioned network, but I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is you really have to plan for how you're going to access your services, your application, your data. Having a good inventory is a must. It's really hard to do that detailed planning if you don't know what you have. But a lot of times, as you were mentioning documentation earlier, it doesn't exist for some of the legacy stuff. The mission comes first, always, and we've got to make sure that we protect the mission. We can't interrupt that or put that at risk. I think timing is important to as you're going to refresh. I mean, if you can time the migrations with regular refresh cycles where money's budgeted for technology refresh, don't do it in your legacy facilities.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right. And then make sure that you have an exit strategy. Because no matter how great a solution looks today, you may have other ideas
Always
tomorrow.
good to have a contingency plan on hand for in case things just don't go exactly as planned. It's kind of like the old people start backing up their data the first time they lose their data. Melanie, what do you think are some of the lessons you're learning as you work your way through this journey to data center optimization?
Sure. We echo at the Department of State many things that Joe has just stated as far as the buy-in and the plan and things of that nature. Something else that was stated earlier, we talk about collaboration. I say it's unity and power. I don't control the security side of the house. We don't control the acquisition side of the house. So you have to have collaboration with those key stakeholders, those that have vested interests for the entire department, understanding that just in case something slips through the crack, or acquisitions will know, well, hey, this doesn't have the stamp of this office, so it cannot be purchased, or you have to go back to this step because that step was missed. Another thing that we look at is prioritization. There's always competing priorities. Joe said the mission comes first. We are a production environment. The work still has to go on. We still have to get out those widgets day by day. And one of the things that our CIO, Mr. Francis Wiggins, has challenged us, he tells us to aim big. and aiming big, one of the things that we learned there is also we have to trust those that we put in place to lead whatever the project is or whatever the assignment is. Just trust that they, once you've given them the vision, if it's the documentation, that they're going to follow that documentation. Trust but verify as well. So we just add that to it.
I like that. Excellent points, Melanie. Thank you very much. Chris Steele, what are some of the lessons you're learning as you work with your customers and go through this experience of data center optimization?
Pretty much the best laid plans of mice and men, right?
Okay.
we all go in and plan, and nothing ever goes to plan, especially in initiatives of this size. So you really need to adopt an agile process. You really need to be able to maneuver and adjust accordingly, because at the end of the day, as well as we plan, these data centers are just so large. There's so many applications. There's so much legacy there. There's so much missing, inaccurate documentation that we know we're not going to get it right the first time. So we really have to plan to do it incrementally, to build on lessons learned, and to be able to adapt and overcome.
Yeah, I guess, in first glance, it's sort of overwhelming when you start seeing all the pieces that need to be worked out and everything else. And I like that idea of agile. It reminds me of what Joe was saying about his Silicon Valley visits, where you're seeing a lot of innovation. You want to get that in. Sort of like a pet peeve of mine, it bothers me a little bit after being out of government for a while, is it seems like it takes a long time and it's difficult to get some of that innovation into government quickly, because of the government processes that are out there. But hopefully some of that's changing too, and as time goes on, some of these technologies will allow faster adoption of innovative techniques and so forth. Chris Howard at Nutanix, how about the lessons learned? What are some of the things along the way here that you're picking up that you'd pass on to others that are trying to do what you're trying to do?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to touch on what you just said really quick is one of the things that we see, and this happens a lot in the government, and you go out to Silicon Valley and those companies, there's too many barriers for them to get into the government.
Sure.
And a lot of that just has to do
dinner with the partner and do a deal.
Well, it's not even that.
You got to go through a long process.
So what we're seeing, and one thing that I'll touch on real quick, and then I'll get to the main question, is that there has to be some sort of sense of acquisition reform, and that's a big thing to overcome. But people are still in the government are still writing acquisitions with 20-year-old technology.
Right.
So imagine if the government was going to buy the state-of-the-art car, and they said you had to have a carburetor. Well, guess what? Tesla can't compete.
That's right.
And so a lot of the acquisitions that are done today eliminate the ability for these innovative and new and modern companies to even compete, because they put in certain words that just give them no opportunity. And they're by the book terms. If you don't match that term, you might as well not even bother.
Right.
So I just wanted to touch on that real quick.
No,
but as far as
excellent
far as the data center consolidation and lesson learns, I think I mentioned it earlier, and I know Joe and Melanie, I think everybody's mentioned it. You have to take it as an opportunity to modernize. 75% of the government's budget is spent on legacy technologies, so you have to modernize. If you don't modernize as you consolidate, you might as well not even go forth with the effort, because you're not going to save any money. You're not going to eliminate the silos that exist, and that's another big key is as you modernize and consolidate, in my opinion, you have to get rid of the silos. You go into a lot of IT organizations and they have separate desktop team, application team, server team, storage team, network team, and I don't even know if they know each other, right? And they point a lot of fingers. And so as you modernize and consolidate, you have to bring in technology that allows you to eliminate those silos. So I think those are a couple of the key points that I would touch on.
Very good, very good. Thanks, Chris. Tony Vicinelli, how about Enlight software? How are some of the lessons you're learning along the way that you might want to pass on to others?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Joe and Melanie both touched on it, and it's that baselining, right? To make sure that we baseline properly what we have currently in-house, right? So not only IT assets, but what are our capabilities as far as monitoring are concerned? How can are we positioned in a way that we can address some of the DCOI targets, right? We may need to make an additional investment, or how can we leverage existing investments to get us there, right? So it is understanding, where my IT assets are. Maybe I can get some of that list from discovery tools that I already have,
Right.
or a CMDB or an ITSM product that I already have. How can we leverage those existing investments to get us there to that baseline? From there, then all of the other things are possible, right? Once we get to that baseline, then we can make good decisions about what should be moved to the cloud, what should be decommissioned, right? That's the side a lot of times that I think a lot of people don't consider in their process. Like, there's so much of getting it in and not a lot about getting it out, right?
Yeah, very, very good point, and in fact, we've had several discussions where people come, they're going through this process, looking at their baseline, and they'll say, when was the last time we've actually used this application? They realize we haven't used this application in 5 years. I mean, things like that come up, so you have an opportunity to get rid of things that you no longer need.
Just the amount of resources you reclaim by doing that could save you untold amount of money. I mean, it's unbelievable. Just from an over-provisioning or lack of touching a certain application or VM for 5 years, as you say.
Sure.
I mean, that can bring back so many resources that you could use for other mission-critical requirements.
You can't just keep putting more products in. You have to look at what product what can I put in that lets me to take some things out. But anyway, all right, Melanie. Let's talk about the hard stuff. Let's talk about challenges and things that are still need to be overcome. Some of the things that you bump into day to day. You say, I just got to get past this challenge to get to where I want to be. What would pop in your mind there?
Everything that I just said is lessons learned. If you just reverse that, these are still challenges that we deal with, but we come up with strategies of overcoming. One of the beautiful things about the Data Center Optimization Initiative, as many of you have already said, it gives us an opportunity to go and look at, it's how many people have really just stood in front of a server in your technical days and said, I wonder if I unplug this, would anyone know? Because you don't see technicians come in servicing and things of that nature. So you look at these devices and you say, okay, how do we consolidate? How do we look at shared services? How do we, it's the discovery process. If your CMBD is not accurate, one of the challenges that I have at the Department of State, I'm responsible for the core data centers. We have 4 core data centers domestically at the Department of State, but there are also many, the definition changed with decoy as well. Well, data center optimization, one server in a location is considered a data center or a server room, so you have to count that. That was not the definition under the FDCCI, right? So your definitions change. So you have to go and look in those closets. You have to go look under the desk or that office that was converted into a test lab, and you have to count those things. Our footprint is large. We have multiple locations throughout the U.S., so counting all and finding all of those locations. So discovery is one of, I think, my biggest challenges right now.
Yeah, I bet you find some things you didn't know about too. I know when I was CIO at Treasury, we used to have independent groups come in, and we used to find sort of like products and IT all over the place. And some regional part of one of the bureaus put in their own IT network that we didn't know about, and things like that. It goes on in the big organizations. I want to hear from the rest of the panel on this, on challenges that you see, but we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Fleisig here with Joe Klimovitz from Department of Justice, Melanie Parker-Hill from U.S. Department of State, Chris Steele from Software AG Government Solutions, Chris Howard from Nutanix, and Tony Vicinelli from Enlight Software. We're talking data center consolidation and optimization and surrounding subjects we're bumping into as we make our way through this. Joe, we talked to Melanie a little bit, but from the point of view of challenges, what are some of the big challenges that you face as you work your way to where you're trying to get to where you want to go?
Sure, I think we've hit on a lot of things that are challenges, but let me talk on maybe on a couple other ones that we haven't really touched on today. We've done this now for a number of years, and I think one of the biggest challenges we still have is the networking. Where we have issues today, it's not about the end environment, the the data centers that we're getting into are huge, very well run, and very reliable and available.
Right.
But the network can be a challenge sometimes because you're talking about reconfiguring. In our existing data centers, we've got a lot of big pipes coming in and out of those things. But when we get to commercial facilities, it may be a little different. We have to traverse different carriers and connect things differently. So it's not just about the workload today, but it's also about planning for the future. The second thing would be is security. In the Department of Justice, security is paramount. We have a lot of very sensitive operations, missions, and we need to make sure that we're just as secure in a commercial environment as we would be in one of our facilities. There's a lot of shared infrastructure. So in some of the solutions, it's a DOJ dedicated environment because of the additional security parameters that we deem necessary. And I guess maybe the last thing would just be the people. You really need to go the extra, mile to take care of your folks. Melanie was mentioning server huggers, but it is an emotional issue. And when you've been doing the same job, working with technology, for 20 years or so, you've got to reassure the folks they're not going to lose the job. They're going to be, have an opportunity to be retrained. And work in other areas, but that's huge if you want to get buy-in.
It's easy to change someone's title, but to have their behavior change and actually begin doing things differently is always a very difficult challenge. Tony Vicinelli, what are some of the challenges that you see that need to be overcome to get where you're trying to get?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a defined process for change in the data center is something that a lot of folks are making sure that that they have spelled out, right? How are we going to take something from the time that it's procured to the loading dock to through that asset's IT life cycle as it lives in as it's staged into production, and when it's done, getting it out, right? So making sure that people understand that there is a process for that change, just like there is for a software change or just for any other change request, so that we can capture that data and make sure that the decisions that we're making are based off of accurate information, so that you don't get old Visio diagrams of where your things are, right?
Absolutely, excellent point.
Yeah, so those types of things of making sure that we're not only taking that change process and make sure that the people that are touching the IT equipment are the ones that are touching it, or they're doing it before the approved time, but we're tying that into our ticketing process, right? So that we can measure how long that change takes, and then we can better forecast for how long does it take to get a new server? Or maybe we should spin that up in the cloud, right? So those are some of the
good points. Very good points.
Sure.
Chris Steele, what do you think? Challenges?
In addition to building on what Joe was saying about the people challenges, it also goes to sort of the time and looking forward, understanding that IT is constantly evolving. And what we see is a lot of times as you move through that planning process and things start to become real, you really focus on today and what do I have to get done, and you start to lose focus on what am I going to need tomorrow, and how do I address it? How do I start building for and planning?
Forward.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is a real challenge for everyone up the chain to really keep that future state in mind as well, so that as you're building, you can build in timeouts to say, we need to stop here. We understand that, in our 5-year plan, we need to be in this direction. Maybe we put this on hold and address that. And
excellent points. Yeah, we don't want to, we need to not move something today if we think there's something tomorrow that's going to be much more efficient. Excellent. Chris Howard, challenges you see?
I think Joe hit it perfectly. It's the people. People get comfortable and they like to go with what they know, and the status quo will always survive because that's what they know and they're comfortable with. So if you can get them to understand that they're not going to lose their job, they're going to learn new skill sets, they're going to innovate and modernize and have more mission critical requirements to their day-to-day job instead of in a data center just kind of turning knobs and tuning hardware. The hardware can't define your initiative. today is a software-driven world, but the people, if they're resistant to those types of changes, you have a lot to overcome. So I think, without question, and outside of funding, people are going to be the biggest hurdle to overcome.
Excellent point. You didn't quite say the word culture, but this is, we've done 150 shows now, and on the challenges, the culture word works into it every single show. We need to look to the future. I think Chris mentioned future, and we like to finish the show by talking about vision for where you all see this going. So we'll start with Tony and work our way right down the table here. And Tony, where's this all going down the road? What's your vision for the future of, will there be big improvements in government down the road based upon these initiatives? We hope so.
Yeah, sure.
So what's your vision, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I think Enlight's vision is to use the information that we're gathering as part of the data center, whether it's the life of an asset or whether it's the power that's consumed, or looking forward, where are things best served, right? Are they best served in the cloud? Are they best served as a managed service? Are they best served on premises? So where are they best served? And to be able to determine that, it's really looking at we talk about it as a data center OS, right? It's a data feed that we're pulling from, and multiple feeds that would be able to inform your decisions better. So if you're looking at a feed from finance and a feed from the data center, you can really talk about how our resources consumed, what do they really cost me, and be able to optimize from there.
It's a better decision making.
Yeah, and then further out from that, you're looking at, I think, the Internet of Things becoming a huge part of being able to use all of the sensors that are at your disposal, and being able to actually leverage true Internet of Things by subscribing to services that are provided through the data center.
Excellent. We've worked Internet of Things into our programs. We've done a few shows on it now, and it's a fun one for me because you can go so many different directions with that. Chris Howard, what's the future look like to you there in Nutanix?
A couple different things. One is, I think I mentioned it before, we're going to move, and it should have already moved, but it's a process to a software-driven world. Hardware should no longer define how we run applications, where we run applications, what our people do. So I think that's the first thing. But the second thing is that, the cloud is inevitable, but what does that mean? Does that mean always to the public cloud? No. It means there's always going to be an on-prem requirement, a hybrid requirement, and a cloud-based, public cloud-based requirement. And what we're doing at Nutanix is similar to what Joe said he's looking to do, quite honestly, is we're building into our solution the ability to say, well, where does it make the most sense for me to run it today? And building in the costing that goes behind that, and the decision making, so that's all automated within the platform. And that's the way I think it's going to be over the next 5 years. Today I'm going to run my application here, tomorrow there, the next day there. Now that movement of those applications is still something that needs to be worked out in a lot of different cloud type scenarios. But I see the world is definitely going to a hybrid cloud environment, and everything will be software driven.
Excellent.
Hardware is gonna, I'm not saying it's dead, but it's
Excellent point. Excellent point. Excellent point. When you look at the price of things too, the hardware, it's not where the real money is. It's the software, the data, the applications. Chris Steele, what's your crystal ball look like down the road where all this is going?
I think Chris has hit the nail right on the head in terms of everything is becoming fluid. So as we move towards microservices, IoT, having the ability to seamlessly move these things on and off-prem to the cloud, replace them with SaaS-based services. The real challenge becomes being able to manage and monitor all that. So how do I track what is the best ROI? How do I track the different costs so that I can move my applications where they need to be? How do I create all these different dynamic interrelationships to be able to satisfy my business functionality and to be able to change that on a dime? And with our
continuous process improvement cycle,
exactly,
just never ends.
Exactly, and that's really where we're going with our portfolio management tool, being able to consolidate all of that data, to be able to see those high-level relationships and be able to track that cost and, show the ROI so that I can go before Congress with FITARA and
Right.
all these other things and be able to lay out in real time exactly what we're doing now and what we're going to be doing tomorrow and in 5 years.
Excellent points. Melanie Parker Hill, what's it look like for you down the road? Where's this all going?
Right. One of the things that Chris Howard had mentioned was, again, the hybrid cloud. At the Department of State, we already have our private cloud in place. We offer infrastructure as a service as well. So we have, we're in that environment and we're doing things, and I just see the State Department us to continue to grow in those areas, also taking on the other considerations that have already been stated at the table among the panel. We're still in our modular data center environment. We're coming out of brick and mortar and we're going into the modular data centers. There's also discussion about us looking at this type of environment, even at post overseas and different environments that are suitable for such. So we're looking at that. One of the things we read in the news, the skinny budget. So we know the climate of the federal government.
Right.
We're going to have to think smarter with our investment dollars. So when our consultants come in and offer things, we have to, think smarter with our investment dollar. One of the reporting line items for the optimization initiative is cost savings. We have to report where are we saving our dollar. Our CIO has challenged us not only to aim big, but he's also challenged us to not just look at modernization, we were talking about that earlier, but look at the innovation of what we're doing. How are we actually impacting and changing the policies, the innovative side of it. So these are the things that we're looking at and focusing on based on leadership, guidance and direction. So.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Joe Klimovitz, as you look down the road, where do you see this going? How's this going to change the government, and how are we going to be doing things differently?
Well, I spent a little time thinking about it last night because I knew you'd ask. And when I think about it, you look at the power that's behind the cloud solutions out there, the computing that's in these data centers, ubiquitous access to the data. I think the end user computing experience is going to fundamentally change because you're going to have access to so many more services. I think that everything around the about providing the user immersive experience powered by these services is going to change. So think about a whole new set of services for the end user because you now have so much information in, in a data center with all that computing power. The aggregation of data, I think, is going to enable artificial intelligence, especially around assisted technologies, alerts, insights. We'll be able to apply artificial intelligence like we've never been able before. And that is a maturing area, technology, but it's going to be enabled by all of these cloud platforms. Cybersecurity spending is going to remain an imperative.
Sure.
All right? That's not rocket science, but I think that is going to be out there. But I think conventional thinking about cyber is going to disappear. It's going to change radically. We're going to see much greater emphasis on securing the data and less on physical boundaries. As many of us mentioned, the boundaries are disappearing, especially as you get into other people's data centers and so on. We need to secure the data, and those technologies are evolving. The Internet of Things is going to create new cyber and data challenges. And I think, lastly, is we're going to see increased investments also in quantum and neurocomputing. The computing, fundamentally, the computing architecture is changing, and this will drive additional insights and capabilities, especially around cybersecurity. So we need to be thinking about and looking at those technologies because they will have an impact on our future.
Excellent points. Thank you, panelists. And now I'm going to try to do what I always try to do, and that is figure out how to summarize all this great content that we had here today. But we talked progress. We talked about the fact that we really are achieving savings. Every one of you were talking about some remarkable savings that have been gotten, and we've been doing optimization innovation along the way, and I think we brought in the fact that telecom plays into that, and so forth. Asset analytics and visualization tools are making a big difference and helping everyone get smarter in terms of how to do these things and do them in an efficient way. When we talked about virtualization, we heard Melanie, virtualization first policy, which makes a great deal of sense. We talked about repeatable processes. Once you get things going, you use repeatable processes in order to keep things moving. We talked about you got to view things holistically. You have to look at the whole picture first because it's complex and it's difficult. I like to talk what I think it was Chris Howard brought up about predictable and unpredictable applications, and as a point that could be used for making a decision about what goes to the cloud versus what stays on-prem. When we talked about lessons, we had all kinds of things to talk about. We talked about the need for buy-in. We talked about the need for migration plans, cost measurement ability. Joe brought up mission comes first, and all the heads nodded around the table. We talked about agile processes and the importance of collaboration, that you have to get everybody on board. We talked about getting management and the data center managers on board for the process. And we talked about the need to baseline what you're doing as you get moving into it. When we talked about challenges, we talked about networking. A lot of times, you go into data centers, you got to make sure that you've got the ability to bring the bandwidth into the locations where you're going. We talked about security. We hit the issue on people, and people need to change the way they're working, essentially, and that sometimes can be a difficult thing for some folks to do. We talk about having defined processes as a challenge that can be reused. When we talked on vision, what I heard was we're leading to a world where we'll have better decision making with better data. It'll be a software-driven world, a world of continuous improvement, a world of hybrid cloud, and a world where artificial intelligence will begin playing a bigger role in learning machines, we'll be hoping, and once again, we're going to focus on mission. With that, I want to thank our panelists for taking time from the busy schedules to be here and share your knowledge with us. I want to thank our sponsors, without which we do not have a program, so thank you for our 150 programs that we've done now. Thank the good people here at Federal News Radio who will always put on an enjoyable day for us. And finally, and most important, thank you to the listening audience to tune in and listen to the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.